Hello, welcome to ListenUp Podcast. I'm Al Neely, and today we have Jessica Sanchez on with us. Jessica is an author and advocate, and she she's now working on her master's degree in social work, but she has a BA in psychology and a BS in public administration. Right? She is a founder of a nonprofit, the Daughters of Both Sons, which is actually is geared towards Black women and Latino women, right? So we're gonna get into that conversation in a little while, but say hello to everybody, Jessica.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here and excited to have this conversation today.
Yeah, we've been trying to do this for a while now. So
yeah, it's long overdue.
yes. So I want to talk about, where does your passion come from, what you do? So how did you get started and why? What is the reasoning behind this?
So I've been at it for a couple of years. I always knew that I had a passion, right? And helping folks. I myself have been through a lot of adversity, a lot of situations, personally. So my passion, I love social work. I love helping the community, and advocacy. And around 2 years ago, I told myself, look, I know my passion is within the realms of within community advocacy, social work, public health, policy. And then I started to write a book. I published those two books as well on just the state of where we are, right, as a country.
What is the title of the books?
So yes, one is Democracy Unveiled, right? That's one of the books that I have as well. And then, talking about the book Democracy Unveiled, that one talks more about the previous election that we had, the 2024 cycle. And it goes into the disparities and the, if I would say, just how going into, right, the conditioning of the electoral process can affect folks, right? So it's like dissecting the shadows of misinformation, because we're literally at a phase right now where we're fighting misinformation, we're combating deceit, right? So that one is based on dissecting all the misinformation that happened and how, right, that affected the 2024 elections, essentially. And then I also have my other book as well that I published, which is Breaking the Cycle, Ending America's Legacy to Division. And that one was more of, speaking about, like, it did go into case studies, but speaking about the power of hope and transformative change, and also just believing, right, believing in a better America, right? Just seeing where justice and equality are not just ideals, but they're realities that we face. So it goes into racial injustice, inequality, and political instability as well.
Okay. You've done some work. I want to break it down, a few of these. Of course, you talk to us exactly why you think these things are necessary, because you have a passion for it. In some capacity, I read where you were working in is it with your nonprofit for DEI, or is it a corporation that you were working with for that?
So I do have my nonprofit daughters are both sons.
Okay.
So the concept of the nonprofit and the idea that bridge, for that to come forth was to help Black and Latina women have culturally responsive therapists, right? And I
Okay.
think culturally aligned care is very important. We do talk about mental health, but beyond the spectrum of mental health, speaking of having culturally aligned care, that's like a subtopic
Mhm.
within mental health, and it is extremely important. So we do a various amount of work, not only gapping care for Black and Latino women with culturally responsive therapists. And that's whether, it's pro bono, insurance based, or a sliding fee.
Right.
We also help them allocate resources. So if they need help, right, for job support, immigration, domestic violence, just food pantries, any resources, we have resource navigators that are able to help them across the US to allocate resources. And then we have healing circles, right? Um, I'm doing a lot of community work as well locally in Myrtle Beach, even though the nonprofit is focused across the US. I'm expanding my efforts here locally, because the work is needed, and seeing the um, just representation of our communities. It just, I'm like, this work needs to, we need to move forward and get this work done and
What is
push
the
on.
what is the what is the outreach? How responsive I'm sorry, how receptive has the outreach been in that area?
Ooh. So even recently we partner with NAMI. So NAMI is, the National Alliance of Mental Health and Illness. And
Right.
we've had last week also we had a conversation with NAMI, a community conversation, because it's important, right? And we were mentioning allyship and what it is, to go through mental health situations, mental health versus mental illness, right?
Right.
And we broke down stigmas within the community and how we can better support the community within different cultures, right? Because that's a thing in the South, primarily the area in this sector, it is Caucasian. So we have to bring in some intersectionality,
Yeah.
right?
Do, yeah. Do you see you work with both Black and Latino um, women? Do you see a difference for their needs, or are they really similar? Because I want to talk about those needs, those differences. What do you see?
Um, wow. So when it comes to that, I see differences and similarities. You can't,
Okay.
so there's so much within the cultural aspect of when we start talking about underserved communities, right?
Yep.
In general, there's a need, right, within minorities and marginalized and underserved communities. But then when you think about um, the representation within the Black community, right, there's also a, a lot of work to be done when it comes to culturally aligned care that we're not seeing, right? Or folks not knowing where to get the resources. Yet in the Latino community, we're dealing also with migrants or language barriers, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're And then on both cultures, there's stigmas on therapy, there's stigmas on mental health, because even as late as the 60s, 70s, if you were to tell someone that you are going through anxiety and depression, that would constitute you to be in a loony bin, right?
Right.
So now we're pushing these conversations forward, and we're
Mhm.
doing the work, and we're doing the advocacy work and educational work to let people know, hey, look, mental health is healthcare. It is a
Right.
real thing. We all suffer from it. There's variations. There's a difference between mental health and mental illness. So we're trying to break the stigma. And especially, in the Latino community, there's sectors as well of the Americanized Latinos versus the migrants that come in. So that's another portion that we're working with therapists. We have a workshop coming up that's going to help both the Latino community and the therapist community that are Americanized therapists help the migrant community of Latinos with therapy, because these are barriers to access care, and language, culture, a lot of it is intercombined.
Right. So I would imagine if you're educated, which a lot of people, they just say, okay, you're Hispanic, so they group everybody together. So now you were talking about the Latino community, and when I tend to think of that, growing up in a larger city, I would always think of like definitely the Puerto Ricans, some Cubans, and maybe some Dominicans. But now with the migrants and the people that are coming from South America, and they are under attack. We've never really even thought about the issues that they're dealing with while they're coming here. And now on top of this, with these ICE raids, and then the trauma that they're facing with being placed in, pretty much where it's concerned, which are camps, concentration camps, and then families being separated, there is probably now going to be something that we haven't seen in the mental health community that we're going to have to deal with. So have you seen, being in North Carolina, is primarily a farm, natural.
Well, South Carolina. South, yes.
You're in South.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I would imagine there was probably a large migrant contingent there working in, the factories and the fields and things. So have you started seeing any of those people coming in and dealing with issues with them?
So I've seen a variety of issues, and this is a great topic to discuss on right now, because I've seen folks not coming to work because they're scared that they're going to get taken by ICE. One.
Right.
Two, and even in construction in the area, we're seeing less progression, because folks, the majority of the community that work in construction and helping these bigger corporations is not talked about, but it is the Southern Americans in the Latino community. So a lot of folks were not going to work for a while, and that has cost in the community buildings to be delayed, and the building of the infrastructure to be delayed for projects that were being built, right? So we've seen that. And mental health, this is a great discussion as well, because concerning women, right? I have women that outreach that they have had husbands that have been deported. Now they're alone with their children, and they're trying to keep the family unit together. I know of one family actually
How do they
that
support themselves?
I'm sorry.
So how are they supporting themselves in that situation? Just, do you have any examples? You want
Oh
to talk about that?
yes. Uh,
Go ahead.
and and I know about one family specifically, right? That, and this is last year when the race started, a police officer stopped, right? The um it's a church member, right?
Mhm.
They stopped the husband in his tracks where he was driving, and they pulled him over. Remind you, he had a business here, right? He didn't have his, he was in process of paperwork. Well, they stopped him, they detained him, they put him in an ICE facility from Atlanta to Miami or in Florida, and then he got deported
Okay,
back
one
in.
thing you said that I want to point out, you said that he was in the process of doing it correctly, right?
Yes,
So he was in the process of going through the stages and the steps to become a naturalized American citizen.
right.
What about his family?
His, so now his family's here,
Okay.
and they're making plans on all um moving because he's from another country. I think he ended up, if I'm not mistaken, in Brazil, but now they're making plans to all move to Mexico to be together as a family. So imagine the cultural uprooting that causes a child, right?
Yeah.
Children, because they have children, from
Yeah.
coming to an Americanized culture to now having that culture shock, going to Mexico just so the family can stay together because the mother is a Mexican citizen.
Okay.
So they just decided that they're planning to make moves to end up being together as a family in Mexico. And this individual had a business and everything in the United States.
Do you have a criminal record or anything that
No
you know of?
criminal record, no criminal record,
Mhm.
none. So seeing all of, these families just being broken, and even in this area, right? Because we have, even personally, I've had some experiences here in South Carolina, of just seeing how folks are just ignorant. And when I say ignorant, it's literally the lack of education and lack of empathy, lack of understanding other people's worldviews. um it takes me aback, to be honest with you, because we've had experiences. I have 3 kids, and I've had racist remarks made, me living here, and I used to live in South Florida. So, the undertones and the microaggressions, you see it a lot. And now we're in a stage, right, in this country where I think people feel emboldened to say things that they felt for a long time, because that's
Right.
the energy that's in the air.
Mm, that's quite interesting. So the the issues that I think we deal with as Black women and Americans in here they're more generational. So now on top of everything else, we have all of these new traumas that we're going to learn or going to have to learn how to deal with. Um, this particular family that you were talking about, um, they are now, what type of business did he have?
If I'm not mistaken, it was like construction, like, things of that sort. Like, um, so he had a stable business.
In
Um,
construction, which is needed, and we have housing costs and everything going up. Yeah,
yes.
you know, one of the things I notice a big difference in is my fruits, right? So
Hmm.
when I'm getting my fruits, it's old, much older. You can tell that it's been either
Yes.
picked or shipped, and it's been a while since it has been picked because it's spoiling a lot faster.
Right.
So I'm tired of going to the grocery store and my produce is looking terrible and bad. So um, I don't know where we are. We'll get back to that. But the daughters of both sons, SUN is for Black and Latino women. So I'd
Right.
imagine the sons is
Duality between both cultures. Yeah.
yes, yeah. So one of the things that I've noticed on your website, you talk a lot about just the different cultures and issues that we're dealing with today. So one of the things I do want to talk about is the democracy unveiled. And you were talking about democracy itself. And what have you seen since the 2024 elections? You were talking about how it's affected us, but what have you seen since then? And how would you interpret what's going on right now?
Chaos. Definitely chaos. Definitely what we're seeing right now in the world is instability, right? Because
Right,
America is supposed to be the standard. And
right.
once America becomes unstable, the global order becomes unstable. And that's what we're seeing. Basically, we're at a war right now. In Iran, there's reports coming out of death tolls being higher, even over 700 of American soldiers in a war, right? That is not even ours to fight, to fight to begin with. So just looking at where we are from what we started 2025 with this new administration to now in almost hitting mid 2026, we see a lot of instability. I have seen, though, folks waking up and seeing that at the end of the day, politics was played on them, if per se, and a lot of folks seeing that, hey, and I think this is important to touch on, folks realizing that we are in a society, and I've been having these conversations where Americans vote on what interests me, the self, and they don't vote as a society for the common good as a whole. So that's, I think, a lesson in our history that we're learning right now, because in the last election cycle, we were filled with misinformation. We were filled with things, with propaganda. We saw social media being infiltrated, right? Within the independent, right, media to podcasters to different things, they pushed a narrative, right? And it is true, when you start saying something so many times, it starts to become believable. Say it enough amount of times and people will start to believe it. And I think from 2015 to 2016 to 10 years now to 2026, that's what we have seen. People have heard this propaganda pushed without fact checking the sources, that they have now believed everything that has been said, which has caused race wars, right? Pinning folks against one another, and it has caused issues of division. So right now, I have seen, we've seen the No Kings protest. I'm seeing more momentum, especially locally here in Myrtle Beach, where I'm at, which is great because this is a red state, right? It's a southern state. So once we start seeing the red states start flipping around, right, and they start saying, hey, this is unacceptable, and they start making their voices heard, now we're seeing, hey, folks are seeing that what they thought was sold to them in a dream wasn't reality, and that we're all at the end of the day fighting in this societal battle together, right? It's not who's better than who. It's not the migrants coming for your jobs. It's not people taking benefits from you, which that's another misconception. It's what can we do to accomplish the societal betterment of, us a whole in this country? And I think that's what we have to go back to and focus on.
Yeah. Okay. So there's quite a few things you said there, but I kind of want to talk. Let's just kind of go back to a little bit of the things that you were talking about in the beginning. You said you have an organization that does community outreach in terms of providing food. Is that food, clothing, anything that people may need?
So we allocate the resources. So we're the bridge, and we work with various organizations, and we're partnered not only locally, but in the US. We're continuing to build, right, our resource navigation system. So
how much contact do you have with people that are in need in the areas around you? Do you have any contact, or a lot, or minimal?
A lot, especially recently because we focus in the US, but locally we have done a lot of outreach, and we're working with partners. So we have gained local partners, and we're actually talking about the community outreach. We're hosting a Healing Together community resource fair on June 13th in Myrtle Beach, Surfside. It's a city right near Myrtle Beach, but we're gonna.
Would you say? I hate to keep cutting you off, but I'm just trying to figure out some information, because I know of some things that are taking place in our community. So, how much of it is actually rural? Are the areas that you're dealing with? Would you say
rural areas? I would say over 75%. If I look at it as a whole.
And what is the makeup, the racial makeup tend to be in those areas?
The underserved communities, but this is the thing. And the
racial makeup, go ahead.
It's in the rural communities, the folks that can't access care mostly are the Black and Latinos. And which there's still disparity, there's still, I can't lie, right? Because there's funding in hospitals that have been closed as well in rural communities. So this does affect communities as a whole. But in terms of access to care and knowing where the resources are and barriers to care, you see the numbers more reflecting towards Black and Latinos and within even rural communities.
Okay. So education, has any of the educational partnerships or co-ops, anything, are there any type of organizations there for that education of people in terms of just academics or medical or mental
so I would say, right, here, right, there are organizations, right, like we do have Carolina Health Partners here in Myrtle Beach, because this is beyond in South Carolina. There's many rural areas. Myrtle Beach isn't as rural, but we do have Carolina Health Partners. They go on sliding fees. Not even if you meet a certain threshold in your income, you get free services for medical, vision, and dental. So we have that. We have Care Team. They're very into diversity, and they're all about diversity and inclusion. They have sliding fees, and they help Care Team.
Care Team, okay.
So they're big on that as well. And I see a lot of minorities going there as well to get access to care, because they do sliding fees, right? And they're a nonprofit organization as well. So in health access, we do have that. In the mental health, I would say there's barriers still, more because we need to work on infrastructure in rural communities. One thing that I saw that's been talked about is bettering the infrastructure to get these folks in rural communities internet access, so they're able to see not only mental health providers, but even their providers online, even for healthcare, for things that are non-emergent, right? For non-emergencies. And this is something that has been talked about. And I think it's important, especially when we talk about access to care, because in rural communities, having these hospitals shut down in these facilities because of funding cuts, at least having that backup of building better infrastructure so these folks can have access or better connection to the internet and be able to see providers is crucial as well. So I do see a lot of help in this area for the disability community. Like with autism, I see a lot of support when it comes to that. But I think the focus when it comes to minorities specifically, there has to be more support and outreach. And that's where I'm coming in to bridge those gaps and work with other organizations, because I feel that we are underrepresented.
Gotcha. All right. So you were talking about the war. I don't know what the makeup is, but in terms of the population, are there, in the Myrtle Beach area, is there a large group of veterans or bases or military support systems in that particular area?
Yes. So here I'll tell you one thing. They're very into like the veteran community, supporting veterans. They're all about that. There's also, I know about, I think like roughly like 10% of the population here is based off veterans from the military, right? So I know they do have like the VA here, right? And
Yeah.
there's a VA crisis support line, and there's a Department of Veterans Affairs here. But
Yeah.
and there's also,
Do you have any knowledge of how
Mhm.
that has been working? Because where I am is just pretty much a large military base. And
Mhm.
I would imagine that most of the services or money spent is a large percent of it is going to go through or some type of support system for the military here where I am. And, you know, we try to make sure that our vets are taken care of in this area. But what we're seeing just a lack of care with the veterans hospital and just the support systems around here. So I was just wondering, are you seeing anything like that in your particular area?
So yes, because this is already, I don't want to use the word rule, but there's already a limited amount of resources. Let's just put it that way. There is long wait times and access to care issues because
Yeah.
funding has been cut in
Yeah.
those departments. So even though we do have the resources of having the VA, right, hospital, I think the nearest military base is in Beaufort, right? Which, yeah, so um so for sure, there's a lot of VA, veterans that struggle too from mental health,
Yeah.
getting,
I'm
yeah.
afraid it's wind up happening with this thing going on in Iraq. And I see it because I'm already seeing some of my friends' kids that are in the service, serving. And we didn't take care of them in the past. So with the lack of funding now, what's going to actually take place? I don't think we need to be over in Iran.
Yeah,
We need to be focusing on American issues, right?
and that was the whole point of this administration. The whole concept was America first. But
Right.
when we're looking back right now, are we really focusing on America first? Because we have many issues at home, right?
Mhm.
And our veterans, I think no matter whether you're red or blue, we can all agree that we're in support for our veterans. There's no question about that. So just the fact that those departments have had cuts to funding, and then not
Mhm.
only the VA but other essential programs, right, in the government, and programs that are needed on a daily basis, right, in the educational system and things of that sort. I mean, it's just where, you talk about fiscal responsibility, but this is fiscal chaos at the end of the day, because as time progresses, we're going to see the outcomes, and they are not going to be great. And who wants to serve, right? Who wants to serve when they feel that their country is not for them, and they're
Yeah.
not getting that
Take care
support,
of them when they get back here. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
That's what I worry about in this area, because I mean we're already struggling with it a little bit, so and and this was before the war. So what's going to
Right.
take place? Okay, so you work with women, and you probably work with women that, in some capacity, have been sexually abused or in having deal with those issues. And I noticed that you wrote a blog about the Epstein files. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is probably near and dear to probably some of the things that you're dealing with on a regular basis, women being exploited. What are your thoughts about they're going to be released? They're not released. They're going to be released. They're on my desk there's nothing to see to, a couple of days ago where Mrs. Trump was getting out in front of everybody, which no one understood
Good.
what was the purpose of that. So we're all expecting something to come down that we don't go down, that we didn't know about, as to why that was necessary to get out in front of that. So what are your thoughts about what's going on with that mess?
Cover up. Point blank. Cover. There's a massive. This goes so deep, right? And there's a massive cover up.
Yeah.
And first, just the way she dismissed the victims, right, when she was standing, even though she got fired recently, right? We
About
see
yeah.
Bondi. She was fired to a much other needed capacity, as they say. But this is a big cover up, and I think that's translating, and why we're even in this war also to begin with, because you start seeing patterns, right, of even when in December we went into Venezuela, right? So there are I think even they're saying even 3 more million files that still haven't been out.
Well, people say that all the time. You really think all of this is just a distraction?
This is first, yes, this is a distraction, because we have to think about the name, not only the names, yes, the global elites that are in those files, but this is the Epstein files is not only based on officials and elites in America. This is a global issue that goes into sex trafficking, human trafficking, abuse, and then you have to follow the money also.
Right.
And what I think, when we start following the money, that's when we're going to see where, right? We're going to get more answers to our questions regarding the Epstein files. But the Epstein files, I can tell you that is a massive cover up. There's various things stated about Trump in those files that I'm sorry,
mentioned in the files. I mean, he has the most mentions. I think there are, based on what we've seen, there's like 30,000.
more than Jesus in the Bible. He's mentioned more. That's wild.
Yeah.
To that, so that tells you, right, a lot. And there have been victims that have come out, you know, talking about, and it's been scrubbed off the internet, but regarding Trump, right? And one in particular that came out with a name, which I'm trying to recall, as a Jane Doe. She switched her name, and her testimony is all over YouTube as well. And many sources are finding it credible. I mean, we already know that he's a felon, right? 38 counts, I believe, right? And then with all of these other allegations, and then we knew the cover up of when he got impeached with Stormy Daniels, also that, trying to hide funds. But everything we're seeing, one is a cover up, and there's puppeteers. There's people working behind him, right? And to me, this was all, and I know we talk about this a lot, I really do believe him running again was for him not to face jail time. And now that he has immunity, he can't be touched, right? Because the court has given him immunity. So this is just, we're just seeing our systems dismantled. And it's heartbreaking to see what these women are having to go through and suffer, because there's no transparency. And I've heard testimonies of the women that have come out, and they've been wanting to meet with the Department of Justice, and this is just being scrubbed under. There's no transparency, and a lot, even in releasing the files that they didn't protect the victims. And some, yes, felt that it was done intentionally.
Yeah. So are you, with your organization, do you see a lot of the similarities? Or I would imagine prior to this that we were making gains with protecting women when it came abuse, sexual abuse, because we were allowed to bring those into court and talk about those. But do you see, when you're listening to the victims from Epstein's encounters, are you seeing a lot of similarities of things that the women that you have to deal with on a regular basis?
Of course, because we went from the Me Too era to now kind of going in reverse, right? When there was advocacy and work done on that. And there's a lot of similarities, because a lot of these women are afraid when they're going through these domestic violence issues. They're afraid to speak, right? And I can tell you this from me, myself, as a survivor. I went through domestic violence, right, in a previous marriage. And most victims, they get conditioned within the relationship of thinking, hey, you know what, they're preparing themselves mentally for the next worst event to occur. So having these victims not being able to voice them, what they have encountered, and not being able to fully disclose because they're being threatened as well. And that has been known by several accounts. What the women that I work with as well in these situations, they get threats, right, by the men that they're being abused by as well. So, there's that I'm scared, or there's that hesitancy of, look, first they come out, they start speaking, they start attempting to get help and resources, and then because of threats, they back off, right? They go back, and then you might not hear from them because they're scared of the consequences that it might bring, right? And it's a psychological conditioning that we do to ourselves, that we think of the worst case scenario, or we undermine the trauma and telling ourselves and lying to ourselves, oh, well, it wasn't, maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought it was, right? Or destigmatizing the whole thing, and it's not that way, right? It takes a lot of reflection and work to understand that, hey, what was done to me was unacceptable, and I have the right to advocate for myself. I have the right to acknowledge and hold those folks accountable for what they
Right.
did to me, and
Mhm.
pursue whether that's charges, advocacy work, whatever it is. You have the right to pursue that and move forward. And we see that with victims of abuse all the time, the hesitancy.
Well, with
But
the paying files and that justice system, that's getting shut down. They're not even getting to advocate for what's
oh
taking
no.
place. Yeah, so
Hmm.
that's the sad part about it. One of the things we also were talking about earlier was with the No Kings protests, um, and red being in a red state or a blue state or just the government itself. I think the large part of our population is that votes are waking up. Um, I don't know how we reach the people that don't vote, and we have a political system that's pretty much just kind of thrown them away, right?
Right.
So, so when we talk about elections won, we talk about, okay, um, this the majority of the percentage of the population that voted, right? Well, the people that don't vote is much larger uh, than either one of the two sides, right? So I I think when you take a look at things now, I think we're starting to see that both parties, for the most part, are not meeting the needs of our population,
Right.
right? I mean, you could see it now because just now, Congress, they won't do anything about all the things that are taking place.
Right.
Um, and if you are in the MAGA party, because I don't really think they're Republicans, I just think they're
Hmm.
sect of the Republican parties. I think you can break it down. They're just rubber stamping anything that the Trump administration wants. But you also have a segment of the Democratic Party, which I think are compromised. And compromised because they're involved in some of the same immoral things that their counterparts are involved in. So I think their hands are tied.
Yep.
So I see with the No Kings protest, people are rising up and saying, you know what, we need to take control of this ourselves because we're
Hmm.
represented in the American community the way we want to be represented. So that's a long question, but how do you see this?
I see this as, wow, I'm thinking about at the beginning, right? And I know before even the march of the No Kings protest, I know a reporter, Jessica Denson, which
Okay.
worked with Trump within, and it's not that I know, but I, follow her. She was rallying. She actually was against, with other folks protesting, for him to be sworn into office on,
Mhm.
the next January 6th, for them not to, affirm him as president. And then, those protests started building momentum. And then we started seeing a huge turnout with the No Kings protests, and it started building and building. And one thing that I'm seeing, right, is that, and I've heard this from various folks, we are starting to see Caucasian Americans turn out more now. And I see that as
I,
a,
I'm, I have a philosophy about that.
mhm. I would love
Before
to hear it.
before um, before the ICE protests, and you saw a little bit of the protests during the George Floyd, where people started standing up. Um, but what you're actually seeing now is they're starting to realize that there are going to be some portion of the white community feel they're going to be attacked. And
Right.
they never had to be concerned about that before, I don't think. So, you shoot this white young mother in the face
Right.
in Minneapolis, and then you shoot this accomplished medical physician
Mhm.
assistant, I believe he's a physician's assistant for the Veterans Department in Minneapolis. You
Yeah.
shoot him in the back. So people are waking up going, you know what, this can happen to us. And we've been telling you as a community of Black folks that have been dealing with this for
Right.
hundreds of years, this happens, right? And you just see it throughout history. Even with some in the Latino community, you see it with the indigenous community. So I think that kind of opened people's eyes, and they're going, we could possibly be targets as well. So maybe we need to get involved in this. And I think that's making a difference. Part of what's making a difference. Yeah.
100% agree. And I was just going to touch on that point because, right, back to what I said earlier, as a society, we vote in America based on the I, not as the whole. And once folks start realizing and seeing, oh, this could come to me now, right? Now it's touched you because you're seeing, just like other marginalized groups, that you could be next. And being white is not going to exempt you from that. So now it's, do we continue to move forward separately, or do we just get into all of this together? Because at the end of the day, we're all in this conundrum of Americans that are gonna suffer one way or another. So
yeah
yeah.
And that's why it's a big push not to educate. I feel like that's why it's a huge push, because if you educate yourself, and people say, I hear so many people say, I don't like history. But if you have a history book, you'll see that this has happened time after time, and in this country quite a few times. But excuse me, if you're educated, you see it coming. And if you're not educated, you tend to be indoctrinated. Like you said, you just hear the same thing over and over again, and you start to believe misinformation. Like, this is a Christian nation. It's not a Christian nation. The people that came here from Europe, and I have my issues with that, but they came here from Europe to start something that did not
exist.
They were being persecuted by the kings, and they were being judged by the religious system. And it was like, we don't want that here. So now all of a sudden you're being indoctrinated that this is how the country was started, which is not, that's so far from the truth. And people actually believe in it. And, that's why the Constitution talks about a separation of church and state for that reason. And you have the freedom to feel, believe, and think however you want to, as long as it doesn't infringe on somebody else's life.
Right.
So, that it's that's where we are. So I'm hoping we keep this momentum with people learning and people going out and protesting, because this country does belong to everybody that is here. And if we get to the point where we're all, or majority of us, are voting, then we can control whatever we want, and we don't have to worry about people buying politicians and to control us.
100% agree with everything that you said. And and that's a big issue in America. APAC is another big issue, because a lot of the politicians that we're seeing, whether they're even Democrats or Republicans, the ones that accept, especially APAC money, they're not working in the interests of the American people. So we have to hold these folks accountable, right? And another thing that I wanted to touch on is even me as a Christian, right? Christians need to stand up against white Christian nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
This is a big issue, and we have to be respectful, because if we're even looking at this in a biblical sense as well, all of this goes against what we've been taught as Christians, right? And we can quote,
your neighbor. Yeah, you're not supposed to judge. Yeah, not supposed to kill.
And it's
violence. Yeah, go ahead.
Exactly. And I 100% agree. And where not only that is that, like you said, there's a separation of church and state, because like I tell Christians, how would you feel if Muslims came right into this country? There's an influx of Muslims, and they were to tell you, hey, this is a Muslim nation, and everyone here needs to be Muslim, and you have to worship even, Allah and all, because folks feel a way about that, right? And we try to indoctrinate that in the schools.
Right.
And they will have a big meltdown, right? And I think religion, that's personal. I think your relationship with Jesus, with Christ, with God, or who you choose to believe in, right? We can agree to disagree on, we don't have to believe the same things, but we do have to respect one another for believing in what we do believe in. And that's the issue. There's no respect of boundaries, right? We want to indoctrinate and enforce. And that's not what America was built on, as you were saying. And we have to stand up against white Christian nationalism, because if we don't do it as Christians, this is what's giving the religion of Christianity a bad name, right? Because it brings a stigma of us wanting to Christianize the nation and not have respect for other folks' points of view, right? And there's a way that we go about that, right? We don't enforce our views on other folks, because if Jesus was alive today, the Republican or the MAGAs, they would think he's a socialist. So it's like, and then like even in the Bible, it says you should know them by their fruits. And a lot of these folks, we're seeing by their actions who they really are. So if you're
in real time,
if you have discernment, you would know as well, right? You would know that these folks, right? You would know as someone with discernment what comes from God and what doesn't. And by seeing the actions portrayed, even by this administration, and the inhumanity of this administration, if you think this is something that's approved by God and you're speaking in the name of Jesus, you have to check yourself, because I think you're speaking on emotion and personal beliefs more than having the Holy Spirit direct you, because this is not the way. So that's what I would encourage those that are Christian, and if they come and listen this, to really reflect, right? We can get our message across without indoctrination and forcing ourselves into systems. And that's where we're finding a big gap in disparity and a lot of chaos and issues, because there's no mutual respect.
Right. I think we're going to end it right there. That was a good word. So thank you for tuning in to Listen Up, and we'll catch you next time on Listen Up. If you enjoyed today's episode, I'm going to ask you to click on the links below. Follow, subscribe, become part of the conversation. And remember, listen up.